something that you love that's not family or friends?
I love, I'm just saying this because it's on my mind, the trans children.
The Democrats have a weird candidate.
Low T Tallarico, too weak for Texas. Lone Star Liberty PAC is responsible for the content of this ad.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A Cola.
We began this episode with a clip from an ad circulated by some entity called Lone Star PAC that asserts Democratic candidate for Senate James Tallarico is too weak and too weird for Texas. You know, we're going to have to do a whole episode on Tallarico at some point, but today, our news focus is going to be on Pride Month and the ways that the Trump administration has systematically tried to erase not just transgender people, but lesbian and gay people from public life. This is the Clap If You Believe in Fairies edition. I'm Claire Potter.
And I'm Neil Young.
I sprung that title on you, Neil.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and today's theme music is Lola by the Kinks, which has been copyrighted by the Kinks, but it is licensed from Lick D. So all of you platforms out there that, you know, take people down for copyright infringement, Neil and I pave our way. But Neil, I did run into something from one of our platforms this week, which is I got what I think was a rebuke from YouTube for dropping an F-bomb.
Oh. Well, shame on you, Claire.
Well, I mean, exactly.
YouTube are moral police. That's not what I really expected here.
Well, what they said was that they had to change the designation on our video and say that it was not for children.
Wow.
Because children should not hear such things. But then that made me think, Neil, I don't think I have ever heard you drop an F-bomb in my entire life. Ever.
I've never used that word, Claire, never once in my life, so.
Well, I kind of thought that was probably true. And then I thought about like how I know you and your character and so on. And I thought your parents like did a really good job bringing you up to be a nice person. I don't know how my parents failed in that regard.
Well, I've probably used the word a time or two, but I'll try to not put it onto the internet to get us in trouble.
Yeah. Well, only when you were very, 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 very displeased, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get to the news summary. They still have almost half the ballots to count in California, Neil, but the field for the general election is starting to shape up a little bit. What is it looking like in California?
Well, there's a couple of interesting things. First of all, in the governor's race, right now, the Republican candidate, Steve Hilton, is at the front of the race for governor, as I said. Democrat Xavier Becerra is a close second. He was someone who served in the Biden administration. He's also the attorney general. And then in a really distant third place, and I can't decide if this is a surprise or not, but the self-funded billionaire Democrat Tom Steyer running a distant third. So a lot more votes to count in the state, as you said, but it looks like it's going to be Hilton versus Becerra for the governorship.
Well, and this is of course, Republican versus Democratic contest in the general election. And it doesn't always shake out that way in California because they use something that is called, and this strikes me as sort of an ugly and racist word, but everyone uses it, a jungle primary, in which Republicans and Democrats compete together and everybody gets to come and vote. So from time to time, you end up with a Democrat running against a Democrat in the general. So on a certain level, this looks kind of normal. Why do you think Tom Steyer sort of lost steam?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, Steyer joining as the progressive, or at least compared to Becerra, he is. I think that there's something about, first of all, the self-funding that's actually seems to be backfiring for him, because what's what his opponents are able to characterize him as is as this billionaire who made his money through ways that I think a lot of folks are not comfortable with, in terms of some of his investments. That sort of, I think there was stuff in Israeli arms manufacturing, or Claire, you may know more about like what some of the investments are that have sort of made him a target of the very progressive voters he's trying to court. But Becerra just sort of emerged, I think, really in a sort of perfect race, because of course he's benefiting from the implosion of Eric Swalwell and his, removal from the race following the really terrible allegations against him. And I think he would have probably walked to an easy victory here. Becerra just sort of quietly moved to the front among Democratic voters, running a pretty centrist campaign, which is also interesting just to sort of get a sense of where California voters' politics are right now.
Yeah, and of course we saw in San Francisco a mayor being elected who was sort of more to the center, who has worked really hard on cleaning up homelessness in the city and visible drug use. We're also seeing in Los Angeles, Mayor Karen Bass has made it through to the general election, but not in a really enthusiastic way. And let's just say in both races, we've still got half the ballots left to count, but we know Karen Bass has made it through. In the governor's race, there's still room for people to move around. But Republican reality TV star Spencer Pratt has sort of crawled up into second place over Nithya Raman, a Los Angeles City Council member. Neil, you spent a lot of time in Los Angeles. What's going on in that race?
Well, it's been a fascinating one to watch. I live in West Hollywood, so I don't get to vote for the mayor of Los Angeles since we're a different municipality. But obviously, whoever is mayor of Los Angeles affects my life and everyone's in the region. So it's been an important race to watch and an interesting one. I mean, Bass is a mayor who a lot of folks have lots of criticisms of, especially, how they feel like she handled, the Palisades fire of a year before. And you don't have to sort of believe in the crazy ideas that Spencer Pratt has, that she sort of willingly, set the city on fire because she wants to destroy it. There's a lot of room between that extreme position and sort of fair criticisms of her and her management, but also a lot of folks feeling like overall she's done a pretty good job as mayor. So there's solid support there for her. That's why she's in first. I think, this race for second is really interesting because you have Spencer Pratt, this reality TV star who's literally never done anything his life and who is just throwing flames. Maybe that's the wrong metaphor to use given some of the issues at hand, but who is just like launching these, attacks from, full of criticisms, but doesn't have any policy positions and certainly has no background experience in running anything to think that he should be able to run this enormous city. And then you have Raman, who's running as a real progressive alternative to Bass. And so I think at the end of the day, there are a lot more votes to count. I actually don't think Pratt will stay in second. I think it'll be a race between Bass and Raman. And it'll be sort of two real distinct options within the Democratic Party. And honestly, I have no way to make a prediction at this point what will ultimately happen in the fall.
That sounds like a race that is worth watching well before Election Day. Okay, so let's turn to Iowa, where Paralympic athlete and Democratic state legislator Josh Turek soundly defeated his progressive colleague Zach Walz for the Senate seat left vacant by Joni Ernst's retirement. Let's just have a moment of silence for Joni Ernst. So glad she's gone.
R.I.P.
Yes. So it looks like Turek will face Representative Ashley Hinson, who trounced her opponent. She is a self-described conservative mom who says she wants to make Washington, D.C. run more like Iowa. What the hell does that mean, Neil?
Who knows, but I think that's the kind of stuff you say when you're running as a Republican in the heartland, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because in the Democratic race, and just full disclosure here, I'm friends with Zach Walls. His wife is one of my closest friends, Chloe Angel. I was at their
No
wedding.
kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
She was a former student of mine at Princeton. Then we became incredibly close friends, in her young adult life. And I was at their wedding a couple of years ago in Iowa City. So, all my cards on the table there. I'm disappointed by this result. Zach ran a very good race. And, he was running as the anti-establishment Democrat, and who was also sort of making a similar argument that he wanted to go to Washington and do things as Iowans knew how to do things and not be beholden to Schumer and the Democratic establishment. So I think, that sort of argument about like real Iowans knowing how to do sort of real work in Washington isn't only one that like, Henson, sort of full-on Trumpy Iowa Republican can make. I think, that discourse works in more than one party. Or at least it gets used by more than one type of political candidate.
It also suggests that what has happened to our political atmosphere in terms of making Washington, D.C. the place of all evil, this is where all the corruption is, this is where all the terrible things happen, that has really been imprinted on people's minds. I mean, folks don't run campaigns like this without thinking very, very carefully about what they're saying. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think it's one thing for a progressive Democrat to make that argument. It's another thing for a Trump loyal Republican to make that argument when Trump's been in power essentially since 2016, right? The swamp is Trump owns it. So what does it mean to go to Washington and clean it up when y'all control everything?
Right. And it sounds like Hinson was a pretty solid win. I think she won something like 82% of the vote. But do you think there's a better chance for a more centrist candidate? I mean, I know the Democrats are eyeing Iowa as a possible gubernatorial pickup. Is that what they're thinking?
Yeah, definitely looking good in the gubernatorial race. I'm blanking on the man's name who's he's like almost like an ideal candidate for governor or as a Democrat to run in a place like Iowa, sort of this squeaky clean, corn-fed white guy. And I'm blanking on his name right now, but I think Turek is an interesting candidate as well. And certainly Democrats are going to pour a ton of money into Iowa, which will mean Republicans will have to too. I think we'll see what happens. I think it's probably going to be moved into the toss-up category, or at least one that's not, reliably read. And I think, especially in the governor's race, the Democratic candidate looks like he may pull out the win there.
It'd be really, really interesting. Okay, so late last week, a federal judge in Miami reopened the settlement in Donald Trump's lawsuit against the IRS, which was settled there were two terms. One was that the Internal Revenue Service was not allowed to investigate the Trump family or their corporations ever again. And the other one was establishing a $1.8 billion fund for victims of weaponization under the Biden administration. The judge took a look at this and said the lawsuit itself was a product of collusion and is itself a fraud on the court. That's sort of like a judge dropping the F-bomb on YouTube. I mean, that is a major attack. The White House seems to want to make another deal, signaling yesterday that it has abandoned a plan for that fund. And so why did Trump taco on this one?
Well, first of all, he always does. So that's part of just how he does things, right? He always chickens out. In his press conference or is it a press conference? In the Q&A session in the Oval Office yesterday, he couldn't answer a question about it. Again, that's sort of how he normally does things, right? He assigns it to other people, says he doesn't know what's going on, and whether that's a dodge on his part or the fact that he literally doesn't know what's going on, or some combination thereof, who knows. But I think what's also significant here is like this hasn't just gotten the attack from Democrats. I mean, a lot of Republicans are not happy with this fund either. And so, I think that's relevant here as well, that there's sort of I wouldn't call it a bipartisan attack on the fund, but certainly a lot of Republicans who don't think it's a good idea. Is Trump going to walk away from this? This one seems much more important to him and important to, I think, his base, but it's a mess. And certainly this decision from the judge and those words just point out what an absolute fraud it all is.
Yeah, and of course, the Republicans now have at least 3 senators who have no F-bombs left to give, who have basically said, put anything like this in a reconciliation bill and it goes nowhere.
Yeah.
And of course, the only real legislation that Congress passed last year was through reconciliation, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. And this year they're trying to do the same thing. So they're trying to stuff a lot of junk into it. Mostly, I think, trying to fund ICE again, which they failed to do. So they're going to do that through reconciliation. But Trump's idea was this $1.8 billion fund could also go into reconciliation, because even if it was decided on, it had to be funded by Congress. And it turns out there are some Republicans who are banding together. I think Bill Lee is one of them, Bill Lee, who got thrown under the bus by Donald Trump, who are banding together to put forward a bill to prevent this from ever happening again. Like they will pass a law saying this cannot happen by any means.
What should we make of that? I mean, is this a building resistance to Trump tactics within the Republican Party, or is this just a real isolated event?
I think it's an isolated event, but I think we may see more of it going forward. And this is why. There was an interesting little piece in the New York Times today about how Donald Trump's Great American State Fair and the UFC fight and all of that stuff are actually being funded through the money Americans pay for National Park Service passes.
Wow.
So all of that money that normally goes to the National Park Service has been diverted to Donald Trump's 250th birthday party for the nation. And my sense is that that might be a little opening into how the Trump administration is just moving money around like crazy. And that Republican senators know this, and that they know this fund could be established behind their back in another way entirely.
Wow, that is revolting to hear. We literally just bought one of those passes to drive through the Shenandoah National Park, so I'm just like boiling now hearing that.
I know, but not boiling enough to drop an F-bomb, because you are a well brought up man. Okay. Also last week, the Trump administration released new proposed guidelines by which all federal grants would be held to the litmus test of President Donald Trump's political priorities. The guidelines turn Trump's various executive orders into a federal regulation and prohibit, among other things, grants to projects or groups that, quote, deny the biological reality of sex or the sex binary in humans, or initiatives that, quote, promote anti-American values, contribute to illegal immigration, advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, or assist in voter registration, or whatever. This law also says that grants could also be terminated at any point if the administration finds out that they are not operating in the public interest. So this makes any grant money from the federal government totally contingent on some 26-year-old dipshit from Hillsdale College who is working for Donald Trump.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is like literally anything as defined in this language. I mean, anything could be not in the public interest by a narrow, group of people who are highly, politically driven here. So, what a way to turn those executive orders into something even more powerful.
Yep.
I mean, kind of brilliant, evilly brilliant. How much longer do we have to deal with this? I mean, is this going to be challenged in any way, or does this have smooth sailing?
Well, my guess is yes. And, I don't know whether you saw the American Historical Association and the ACLS won its lawsuit against the Trump administration. So the Trump administration canceled the grants for the National Endowment for the Humanities last spring. Actually, that was a Doge thing. The American Historical Association has won that lawsuit. So my guess is this will be subject to another lawsuit. I think it's just one of those exhausting things where certainly a lot of money has not gone to a lot of good things because most of us are simply not applying anymore. I mean, I don't know anybody who's applying for federal grants because we know we're not going to get them.
Of course, right. In addition to, the money that was pulled back through the Doge stuff, right? This is also just the chilling effect, right? Like, who in the world would apply for something right now, given what's happening? And I think, that's an incredibly effective strategy on the part of the administration. Everyone's just going to take a pause, whether or not these things are operating, certainly for the sense that, you just don't even want to engage with this administration.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's also another good example of the Trump people moving money around. Right. Because that $250 million that should have gone to National Endowment for the Humanities grant winners actually went to the Garden of Heroes or whatever is that statue park that he's building in. I mean, who knows whether that will ever even happen, but that's the money that was supposed to pay for it. So they just take money that has been appropriated for something else and move it somewhere else, which is why I think those Republican senators are moving on this bill for the $1.8 billion.
I mean, where's Congress here? And its role of its duty to oversight. Also, relatedly, I was in D.C. a few days ago. We were driving through on our way to New York, and the entire Washington Mall is just a construction site. There are cranes in every direction. Including the UFC thing going up, but literally the entire mall is a construction zone, fences, construction cranes, big signs from the administration saying how they're making DC safe again. It just feels like, what in the world is happening? This all has to be a boondoggle and worse. And who signed off on this? I mean, it's wild. Yeah.
Well, Congress just sat there and let it happen. That's right. And, I think we know why. We know that there are a lot of senators and a lot of congressmen who are looking forward to a long career of, making themselves more and more comfortable in the world, and they don't want to rock the boat. It's going to take so much time and so much energy to claw back. I mean, just repairing what he has done to the White House is going to be horrifying. Somebody said the other day, talking about what Trump does and does not announce, is that there has been less use of what they used to call the Rose Garden statement, in which the president would just walk into the Rose Garden and there'd be a gaggle of reporters and he would announce something. And then the reporter said, but of course the Rose Garden doesn't exist anymore. Right. It's just like a huge patio. Okay, on Tuesday, we learned that Bill Pulte, a longtime Trump ally and currently head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, will become the acting director of national intelligence when Tulsi Gabbard departs in July. This is the answer to the question, who knows less about national security than Tulsi Gabbard? Who is Bill Pulte?
Well, he's 38 years old, which is just one of those things that's shocking to me, how people quite younger than me at this point are being given huge responsibility. Like you said, he has no national security experience. He was born in Florida. He went to Northwestern University as an undergrad, where he majored in broadcast journalism. He then moved into finance. He has like a hedge fund or his own investment fund, and has become incredibly wealthy doing that. And then he was, as you said, or he still is, head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. And one of the things that he's done as head of that was to come up with this scheme to go after Trump opponents. So people like Adam Schiff, Letitia James, Lisa Cook, for alleged mortgage fraud. So things like Letitia James, apparently claiming she had primary residency in Virginia, and they were trying to prove it was in New York. And I think with Adam Schiff, it was a different issue, but like all these folks have been pursued for, you know, quote unquote mortgage fraud. And, you know, this has even gotten some Republicans to oppose him because they think this agency is being, you know, politicized and used as a political weapon. But, you know, back to the national security thing, he has no experience at all here. And this is really frightening. Apparently he was Roger Stone's choice. And Roger Stone.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So he was Roger Stone's choice. Roger Stone told Trump that he should put him in this position. And Stone and other defenders of Pulte, their defense of him is all personality based, that he's an attack dog, that he's a bulldozer, that he'll go in there. Right. That's like the way it's being defended or articulated is, you know, based on who he is and his personality, which of course is something that like Trump likes in a person. But again, never once had any national security experience, no background on this issue.
Yeah, we do better with Harriet the Spy, I think, as director of national intelligence, although she doesn't dress in the way Trump wants women to dress. So she probably couldn't do it. But, you know, really, the other thing I heard about Bill Pulte is that his family doesn't really like him. His family is very heavily into real estate in Florida, major firm, major money makers, and they have kind of sidelined him because they really don't like how involved he is with the MAGA movement.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right, so let's go on to the news focus, Neil. This week, we're talking about, first of all, it's the first week of Pride. Happy Pride, Neil.
Happy Pride.
And we're talking about the ways in which, as you and I believe, predicted last year, that the administration's campaign against transgender people would roll over into a campaign against lesbian and gay people. And we're really seeing that at the beginning of Pride. We started with that clip from the ad, an attack ad on James Tallarico, in which they have clearly been intimating that he's either gay. Stephen Miller called him trans. James Tallarico, by the way, last week confirmed that he is in a relationship with a woman, to which Congressman Wesley Hunt from Texas quipped, "What's his name?" You know, if I had Tim Scott in my party, I really don't think I would throw stones at other people's windows, or Lindsey Graham for that matter. So what are these Republican attacks on Tallarico's masculinity, sexual orientation, and gender identity about, Neil?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it's that Texas is in play, and Tallarico is a serious candidate who has Republicans scared about possibly losing Texas. So that's why, you know, they're doing this. That's why all guns are blazing here. And also they're tapping into, you know, a politics that's been at the forefront of their sort of strategy for a really long time, as we know, but has been particularly useful to them recently. And you know, the 2024 campaign and how anti-trans stuff was front and center in Trump campaign messaging and strategy. So I think they're sort of pulling those things together in this. And you know, I think it's both a sort of a way to attack Tallarico, who has, I think, a good chance to win in Texas, but to give some sort of red meat to the base in a place like Texas where this kind of stuff works pretty well, or at least I think it has historically.
Right. And of course, there's a lot of film, because Tallarico has been in the state legislature for as long as he has. There's a lot of film of Tallarico defending LGBT plus people in the state legislature. He has been interviewed on podcasts and actually that clip that I used begins with him saying that he loves trans children. So he's being mocked for that. He has been mocked for being vegan, which actually it turns out he's not vegan. Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong with that, listeners. I'm just saying he's not vegan. But the idea that to be vegan is to be not Texas, to be not really a man, to be, in terms of the internet, a soy boy who is not sufficiently masculine.
Yeah, and they're going after his appearance, the way he stands. I mean, there was a picture put out where he was standing and his legs were sort of spread, and he had like one leg in front of the other, and they just went wild over that. Like, this is not how a real man stands, and all the rest. So on one hand, I think all of this, like I said, speaks to the desperation they feel about trying to chip away at this guy's popularity and the fact that he has a real chance in Texas. And also it speaks to just the homophobia of this party doesn't take much to set in motion, and I think is really ugly here. Not that it ever isn't, but seems particularly gross given the timing of it. I do think, like, your point about all these videos of Tallarico speaking is relevant too, because this is a guy that has a lot of clips out there, and yeah. I have had this feeling in the last week or two when those clips have been sort of weaponized and repurposed into attack ads against him. Like, oh God, if this guy knew he was going to be running for to be the Democratic senator of Texas, would he have sort of made all these statements? I mean, I'm not sure that this is the way that a Democrat wins election statewide in Texas, even as I hate having that response, because of course he should speak up for the things he cares about and the things he believes in. But if they can paint him this way, I think it's something that can work to, like, hurt his standing with independents and with moderate Republicans who probably would really like to support a Democrat, but who could also have their support easily weakened by stuff like this.
Yeah, and or just simply not be inspired enough about Tallarico right. to go and vote, or to vote on the Senate line. Well, let's talk about homophobia more generally, which you and I have been tracking since Trump took office. But in fact, Project 2025 took aim at policies that promoted LGBTQ equity and human rights. The document criticized USAID for imposing an LGBTQ quote, agenda on African nations, and referred to it at one point as bullying. And gay and lesbian people are increasingly emerging in Republican conversations as people who want to force their way of life on others. Neil, I feel like this is back to the future somehow.
Completely, because of course there's a long history of that type of discourse, that politics, really reaching back into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when I think it became such an explicit, overt sort of politics of the right, but one that we saw really sort of, I wouldn't say go away entirely, but that became downplayed, especially yes. I think in the George W. Bush years, even as, the Bush administration had its own sort of anti-marriage equality politics at work. But I would say in the last 20 years, that overt anti-gay language just fell out of favor from GOP leadership, from national candidates as well. So to see it surging back is to say exactly what you did, that like this does feel like a Back to the Future moment where that politics of the past is coming roaring back.
Yeah, and remember Dick Cheney reproving his daughter Liz for having come out against gay marriage when in fact her sister Mary was gay married, and Dick and Lynn Cheney basically said to Liz, no, you need to apologize and you can't do that. I mean, that seems like a million trillion years ago. So Project 2025 also criticized Health and Human Services for LGBTQ plus family equity policies, saying that they should be replaced with new rules that encourage, quote, marriage, work, motherhood, fatherhood, and nuclear families. This gets us to the point where Republicans are using the word nuclear family to define heterosexual marriages with children. That is a very narrow and very specific definition, because all these other words actually apply to gay, lesbian, trans, and bisexual people, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think the sort of the very limited way in which the nuclear family is being invoked and defined is really obvious here and clear. And like we're seeing it happen in states that are, what is it? Tennessee and Indiana have declared that June is nuclear family month, or
right.
Something along those
right.
lines. Clearly being done as a rebuke to obviously the national trend, or the national observance of June as Pride Month, but also I read the Tennessee Declaration, and it said specifically that a nuclear family is one in which a man and a woman raise children. It did say that those children could be biological, adopted, or fostered. So in part, I read that document to see that whether or not it would even include adopted and fostered children, because I think that that's an open question of who, some of these
right.
nuts think, should be counted in a nuclear family. But obviously this this very particular version of heterosexual, male-headed families.
Yeah, I kind of think the Republicans went after infertile women early on in Trump too, and it didn't go very well. Right. So they're all being very, very careful. I think that there was that bubble when it looked like there was going to be a Republican bill to restrain in vitro fertilization, because somehow that offends people who think all clusters of cells are babies. I can't even remember why, but they sort of ruled that out. So they're sort of suggesting any straight couple who is raising children at all is a nuclear family, but none of the rest of us can be nuclear families. And I think this relates very well to the administration's position on transgender people. The transgender people simply don't exist.
Right.
Similarly, I think this directive from Project 2025, which has been followed as a policy document, says that there is no such thing as the gay family. There is no such thing as the lesbian family. There is no such thing as gay or lesbian marriage.
Right. That these are all false
fictions,
yeah. And that they've been sort of generated by, a woke mob that invented them out of thin air, and that are, ahistorical and not inherent and all the things, but are ultimately fictions. And I think, at the heart of this is a movement, and we've talked about this in so many different examples over the last year or so, of attacking visibility, of making gay folks and persons of color invisible. And I think that is at the heart of this as well.
Yeah. And also in Project 2025, we had a line that said that Trump should rescind anti-discrimination policies that prohibited discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics. In other words, it's not just the federal government. They are farming out discrimination to everybody and encouraging them to get on board. So on January 20th, 2025, the first day he was in office, President Donald Trump issued an executive order eliminating federal recognition of transgender people. What else was in that document that people didn't talk about at the time, Neil?
Well, it was sort of buried in there, but there were 5 orders that eliminated federal guidance on harassment and inequity by sexual orientation in schools and in the workplace. So I think, the headline sort of focused on the elimination of the federal recognition of transgender people. But again, as you sort of opened this section saying, all of this, all the sort of anti-trans movement is really a cover for an opening wedge in a broader attack on LGBTQ folks, and
Right.
An executive order like this demonstrates that pretty plainly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then we had aggressive actions, such as in June 2025, when Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth renamed the USNS Harvey Milk, which was commissioned in 2021 under Biden. He replaced Harvey Milk's name with a Medal of Honor winner, a guy named Oscar V. Peterson. And he said that the reason he was doing it was that he was taking the politics out of the military. Harvey Milk was a Navy veteran. He served in the Korean War. I mean, I remember at the time just being stunned by this. What is the purpose of doing such a thing? I mean, the USNS Harvey Milk, it's one of those little boats that comes up to the aircraft carrier and gives it jet fuel. And so, it's not like it's a big deal ship you're sending around the world. What is the point of this, Neil?
I mean, it's erasure. It's what we were just talking about before. It's to make those things that were hard won to get visibility and recognition, like disappearing them again, and whitewashing our history. I also want to add that Harvey Milk, for much of his life, was a Republican. He was a Goldwater supporter. He campaigned for Goldwater when he lived in New York. He really moved to the left later in life when he moved to San Francisco and became more engaged in politics there and ran for office. But he spent half of his life as a registered Republican, so take that, Pete Hegseth.
Well, and he was murdered for being gay. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was murdered by a fellow city supervisor who had a paranoid fantasy in his head that Milk was out to destroy him, and he was murdered. So was Mayor George Moscone. Yes. It's really the event that actually puts Dianne Feinstein on the political map in the United States. She's mayor of San Francisco at the time and then runs for Senate after that. So, all right. So Harvey Milk is no longer on the ship. What we've also seen is states, about 22 of them, that have gone into motion in various ways to suppress discussion of LGBT plus people. 7 states have banned the teaching of all LGBTQ texts and topics from publicly funded schools. That is Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, and North Carolina. We are looking at you. Arizona, Texas, Mississippi, and Oklahoma also banned discussion of LGBT plus sexuality in sex education courses, while Florida, Texas, Utah, and Iowa ban LGBT books from public and school libraries. All in all, at least, well, it says 19 states, not 22, but 19 states have laws of this kind to simply suppress discussion of gay people. Neil, what is the fantasy that if you talk to young people about being gay, they will in fact become gay?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly that, but it's also the fantasy that even though, and I think this is a fantasy that sort of changed in recent years, right? Because like the older fantasy there is just like, discussion visibility makes people become gay. I think as medical science and sort of broader public better public attitudes about homosexuality have shifted, that sort of real wild notion that folks can become gay because of like they heard about it has mostly fallen away. And so now I think the argument is more that this would encourage folks who have those tendencies or those feelings to act upon them. So it's sort of this bizarre recognition that like gay people exist, or that at least homosexuality exists as a real thing. but that
Right.
like society shouldn't do anything that encourages it, because in the absence of that encouragement, then more and more folks are going to be prone not to, you know, act out in their own lives to develop it in them, within them. And so, you know, maybe this is like splitting hairs a bit, but I do think it's an important sort of transformation in the sort of ideology that's at work here, and the thinking and the logic really behind it.
Well, and these folks seem to think that actually there are more gay people than there used to be. And I don't, in fact, think that is true.
Right,
I think
right.
there have probably always been a certain number of gay people. There have been a fair number of people who perhaps balance being secretly gay with being overtly heterosexual. I'm looking at you, Congress. But it's also the case that it sort of parallels a theory from the right about transgender kids, which is that kids are never really transgender. It's just an effect of what they call contagion.
Right.
That transgender theory and philosophy and ideas sort of flow from student to student, and that they don't really have the barriers to screen these things out so that they believe that they are that thing. And certainly contagion has been a big theme in the history of homophobia as well.
Yes, definitely. This notion that it's an epidemic, right, and that it's a mind virus. Like these are some of the sort of words and phrases that were used historically. I think what happened with the sort of incredible expansion or the incredible increase of public tolerance and acceptance of homosexuality that we saw really from like the late 1990s into recent years, I mean, it's one of the most remarkable shifts in public attitudes ever seen in American history.
Yeah.
Right? And so much of the sort of logic that underpinned homophobia and drove homophobia was really minimized and even erased by those changing, you know, public attitudes. So I think like different strategies need to be used now and obviously children are always invoking children, and the sort of safety and health of children is always like the wedge issue. And we've seen that most recently in this, but I think, you know, it's been interesting to open up Twitter in the last week and or X, and to see in just the first few days of June the rabid anti-gay messages that are on there that really feel completely unleashed, but also again feel like a throwback to language we haven't heard in 10-20 years about, you know, associating homosexuality with pedophilia, of saying, you know, all of this needs to go back into the closet, and that gay people don't exist, and all the rest. A resurgence of language that seemed to have been completely removed from public discourse just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and we're seeing certain kinds of attacks, not just in the Tallarico campaign. I mean, one of the things that is so vile about the way Tallarico is being attacked is that's how you attack a gay kid in a boys' school, an overtly gay kid in a boys' school. You criticize what he looks like, you criticize how he dresses, you criticize what he eats. You tell him with every time you open your mouth that he's not a real man, that he is insufficient and he is disgusting. And I saw that when I was a kid. I saw boys bullied like that. I saw girls bullied like that. So it's really taking that to an adult activity like a political campaign. I wonder if it's going to backfire on them. And, you know, I've seen it in these other campaigns. Representative Andy Ogles, Tennessee 05, celebrated Pride Month by posting on X, "Homosexuality has no place in America." Apparently, even his own people went after him for that, because he's now saying, oh, he didn't really post that. It was really a campaign aide that put that up. And he has reprimanded that person. South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who is a horrible human being and I personally think a little crazy, she will face Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette in that state's Republican primary. She has issued a campaign ad charging that Yvette's consulting firm, quote, took millions from the woke mob to implement DEI, and the entire ad is decorated with pride and trans flags. Even though, in fact, they don't use the words at all. They just use the symbols. So using queer people to slime candidates who are themselves heterosexual, I mean, this is sort of new, isn't it?
It is. I think, it sort of resurrects some long tensions within the party over gay rights and sort of the visibility of homosexuality, but does so in, I think, some pretty new ways, especially in the example of Mace. Mace is also really interesting, I guess is the way to put it, in that, not that long ago, she was one of those gay-friendly Republicans who had close association with log cabin Republicans who, if you don't go all that far back into her Twitter account, is posting celebratory messages in, June for Pride Month and all the rest. So she has enormous political ambitions, and in the state of South Carolina has obviously decided that you achieve those ambitions by, turning yourself into a complete Trump loyalist and also beating the anti-LGBTQ drum. And also, I think, as you said, she's also not well. But, I do think remembering her different politics around this is important because it sort of speaks to, again, some really quick transformations that have happened in the Republican Party around this issue.
I think that's right. And we're seeing whole states, Utah, Idaho, and Montana, have banned the flying of Pride or Black Lives Matter flags, specifically those flags on public property. There are similar bills pending in Wisconsin, Tennessee, and Ohio to also ban those flags. Florida and Texas have already prohibited street art, painting crosswalks, and bridge lighting with pride themes. In other words, nothing municipal can have a pride theme. I do remember that last year in Jacksonville, a bunch of queer activists got flashlights and put colored gels over them, and they went and stood along the bridge in Jacksonville and turned their flashlights on and created a pride flag. So, I don't know who these people think they're dealing with, but we don't quit easily, we queer people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point, because if you think about just the history of the last 50, 75 years, it has been one where all the forces of the federal government have often been pointed against LGBTQ folks with, incredibly devastating consequences, and it didn't defeat the movement. If anything, it sort of focused the movement and I think gave it a real sort of sense of purpose and power to continue on. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these examples are just ridiculous. I mean, to remove a rainbow crosswalk feels really different than directing the FBI, against persons and having their mail surveyed and all the rest. Yet, of course, they're all of a piece too. And I think it's about the coordinated actions of government power against, some of its most vulnerable citizens. I just have to also add, as someone who was, born and raised in Orlando and who still spends a good amount of time there, driving by Pulse nightclub, which is, just next to downtown Orlando, and, was a site of this horrific massacre, and where activists and community members had, painted the crosswalk, and to see that having been pulled up is just disgusting. This place of a mass atrocity would be politicized in that way is such a is such an FU in the face of victims and their families.
Yeah. Well, and let's look at some other things that are, not inexplicable when you think about the Trump administration. Donald Trump has never recognized Pride Month except once in 2019. He wrote a little Twitter thread about Pride, but that's it. He is, and it was normal for many years for the president to declare June LGBT plus Pride Month. But he's never done that. And he actually doesn't recognize holidays for Black people at all. But in February 2026, the National Park Service removed the pride flag from, wait for it, the Stonewall National Monument in New York City. It was restored after protests and a lawsuit. However, references to transgender people have been removed from the physical site and the website, and the National Park Service has put a pause on any further donations or to any research at the site. So while they backed off on the flag thing, first of all, they've erased transgender people who were the frontline warriors in the Stonewall Rebellion. And second of all, the fact that they are hoping, I guess, to starve the site by not allowing people to donate to it or do research to create exhibits and build it and so on. So there's this sort of like big hole in the Stonewall National Monument that isn't apparent to most people unless they look it up.
Yeah, and to go after Stonewall, I mean, just as to sort of make it clear what the project is here.
Yeah.
I think maybe now's not the time to introduce it, but at some point in this conversation, we might as well do it now. It's worth pointing out that there are a lot of high-profile gay men in the Trump administration, and
right.
As I wrote about in my book about gay Republicans, the Trump campaign, especially the Trump campaign in 2016 and in 2020, had a really, really different message and approach when it came to gay voters. They were the first Republican presidential campaign to ever explicitly pursue gay and lesbian voters, and in fact even made an office directed towards that voter outreach in the 2020 campaign. So there's like a lot of complexity here. I don't think that complexity means we have to think about this in like nuanced ways, but like, I don't know. I want to throw back a question that maybe should be posed to me as the author of a book about gay Republicans, but like, what do you make of that, Claire?
Well, I was thinking, I read this great book about gay Republicans by Neil J. Young, and part of what I took away from it is that there are a great many Republican gay men who simply wanted to be left alone. They weren't interested in visibility. They weren't interested in doing politics. They weren't interested in anything gender bendy or, changing the society or anything like that. They just didn't want to be arrested and, thrown in jail and publicly humiliated and so on. So I think one of the things your book has to offer us is an explanation for why people like Scott Bessent just sit there doing nothing. And not only sit there doing nothing, but goes in front of Congress. Somebody raised the question of Bill Pulte to him and said, is it true that you said you were going to punch him out? And Scott Bessent said, oh, no, what I said was that I was going to kick his ass. Yeah. And I sat there thinking, really? A grown-up, adult, cultured man is saying he's going to kick some other man's ass in a cabinet meeting. And by the way, Bill Pulte's 38 and you are in your late 50s, buddy. Yeah. That is really not happening. But this sort of like cosplaying of a kind of traditional masculinity that actually, one of the really nice things about a lot of gay men is they thought seriously about male violence and that violence isn't a solution to certain kinds of struggles and problems and so on. And so I think in many ways there's some of these guys who don't see themselves as part of a LGBT community. They see themselves as Republicans who happen to be gay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I interviewed so many folks for that book, and it was also evident in the historical record and the archives I was looking at, but particularly in, the interviews I did with folks who are, of this generation of gay Republicans, they would say over and over again to me, LGBTQ isn't an identity. It's a political
Right.
It's a political group, and they really believe that. And there's a long, complex history that my book goes into around a lot of those ideas. But I will say one thing that my book really sort of made a central argument, and really sort of the way that my book concludes, and is a conclusion that sadly is like even more true today in the events that have happened in the 2 years since my book came out, is that the long history of gay Republicans existed in large part to be a thorn in the side of the Republican Party, to hold
Right.
the Republican Party's feet to the flames about its homophobia, to make it a more tolerant and open and accepting organization, to not necessarily make it into the party of gay rights, but to say, like you said, stop going after us, right? So they have sort of a neutral politics, right? Like, you don't have to like give us special rights, as they would say, but stop going after us. That's the long history there. And the transformation in the Trump era is to go from being sort of outsiders, thorn in the side of the party, to inside party players who serve to prop up the party and to give loyalty to Trump, even at their own expense, and particularly have done so in a lot of ways by targeting the LGBTQ rights movement and gay and lesbian folks on the left. That's how they've sort of proven their loyalty to the party and shown their sort of like Republican identity card, is in doing that. And that is a enormous transformation of this history, and a real abandonment of what they used to be and what they used to do.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, Neil. And I also think that we can just come out and say it, that the vast number of people who are hurt by homophobia, as opposed to having feelings hurt by homophobia, are poor. And the vast number of kids who are thrown away, who are thrown out of their families for being gay or being trans, those are the kids that are hurt by these policies. People like you and me, frankly, we can protect ourselves with our educations, with our social positions, with our income, whatever. But there are the vast majority of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people don't have money. They don't have good educations. They don't have comfortable homes, and so on. So it is a way of picking on a political group that, sure, there's a bunch of us out front who can protect ourselves, but there's an awful lot of people who can't protect themselves. And I do think this kind of contempt that these governors have shown for us as a group. I mean, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the governor of Arkansas, declaring June to be Fidelity Month, during which Arkansans are urged to commit to fidelity to God, family, community, and country. Well, if you're choosing June, what you're basically saying is all those values are not the values of the LGBTQ community. You mentioned Bill Lee, who signed a similar proclamation that designated June Nuclear Family Month and ruled gay people out of order in that. Mike Braun of Indiana has also signed such a bill, as has Spencer Cox of Utah. So it is a way of staking out a certain kind of ground and saying, these are Republican values. All you lesbian and gay people, you don't get to share them.
It's really rich to see the Republican touting Fidelity Month when Donald Trump is the president. I mean,
I know.
Physician, heal thyself.
I know.
Right?
I know. I keep asking people this on X, and including there is a campaign, an actually quite organized campaign on X against Graham Plattner, which I think is driving the media intensive focus on Graham Plattner. And I still can't figure out why anybody cares about sexting. I mean, except for Graham Plattner's wife.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with the rest of us? I have no idea.
Well, back to the Fidelity Month stuff.
Okay. All
it
right.
reminded me of the 1990s, the anti-gay politics of the 1990s, which I read
Yep.
about a lot in the book. And, there was this surge of homophobic politics that, Pat Buchanan was really spearheading in the Republican Party during the Clinton administration. And it spread across the conservative, media sphere and really animated Republican politics in that decade of, and this is really directed at gay men, but gay men being a threat to the American family. And of course, the American family meant one thing. And there were a handful of conservative gay writers like Andrew Sullivan and David Bowes who wrote these really incredible pieces in the 90s saying, hey, if you care about family values and the protection of the family, here are the things that are ravaging the American family. It's the heterosexual divorce rate. It's, and they had some other reasons that I think were, less, not ones that we would support necessarily about, women working and things like that, but just sort of like focus on your own team, the threat to the American family is from within. And, anyway, I just think that's sort of an interesting thing to think about here. Obviously, we're in a really different cultural and political moment than the 1990s. And I think this sort of movement to create fidelity months or, nuclear family months isn't the same thing as what was happening in the 1990s. But when Donald Trump is the president and the leader of your party, the family values politics just seems so pathetic and such a obviously hypocritical, play for power.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to leave it at that, Neil, but listeners, if you believe in fairies, clap your hands, because actually we need to remain visible. We need to remain supported. And I do think there is one group of people. Okay, so I thought I was closing, but I'm not. One group of people that were fully activated in the 1990s and 2000s, and that was parents. I think it is far less likely that parents will reject their children for being gay or trans than it ever was. Yeah. And I don't think that's going to change. And we see a lot of people who are not progressive, who are maybe even conservative, who are people of faith, for whom protecting their child and getting the best for their child is top of mind. I mean, my parents never thought they were going to have a lesbian as a daughter, and they weren't really happy about it. And it took a while for us to figure out how to talk about it, how to come back together as family, and so on. I see a lot of other young people coming out in ways that, maybe it's kind of a struggle, maybe it's hard, but they're not facing the same kind of parental resistance as young people did when I was coming out.
Yeah, that's right.
So God bless you, Mom and Dad. Neil, what do we want to go viral next week?
Okay, so did you know that Candace Owens is in Russia?
No.
Okay, so...
Neil!
Yeah, so... You should check out her Twitter feed because she is on what she called family vacation to Russia with her husband and child, and she is tweeting constantly. And so I sort of went down the rabbit hole of looking at all her tweets yesterday and today about this and just sort of being absolutely stunned to see this. And the complete rah-rah campaigning she's doing for Russia and saying that she's there to show the American people, that they've been lied to about Russia, and that when she gets back to the States, she's going to be telling, her followers all about, the good things happening in this country, and also why what Russia and the U.S. need to have stronger, closer relationships. So I really wanted to read a good think piece about this because I was like, someone needs to tell me what's going on here and really sort of analyze this. And so I just Googled Candace Owens Russia trip. And I mean, we're only a couple days into it, so maybe more think pieces are coming, but the only one that came up was one from the Free Press, which is not a publication I make a habit of reading. Free Press is, formerly, created by Barry Weiss, formerly helmed by her. I don't think she still runs it, but, folks understand.
She's too busy destroying CBS News.
Right,
she has no
right.
time for the Free Press.
But, I've looked at it here and there. I mostly think it's not a very impressive site, but every now and then there's a piece that I think, okay, that's some interesting stuff. This piece is really good. It's by a young man named Park McDougald, and the piece is titled "Why Candace Owens Went to Russia," subtitled The Stars of MAGA's Conspiracy Podcast Wing are posting about the glories of Moscow and laundering Kremlin narratives. And it just is this incredible evisceration of Candace Owens and other folks on the MAGA, conspiracy podcast wing, like Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, a few other names, who are just, full-on Russia fans and who are cheerleaders for Russia constantly, and it really uses the Owens trip to explore this bigger realm on the far right, but it just does it in such a way. I love how it skewers Owens and the pretenses of her trip. So, like, one of the things that she said is that, and Owens is a Catholic, or at least a recent Catholic convert, and she said that she wanted to visit Russia to, quote, see some of those cathedrals and churches. And she's been tweeting out all these pictures of these churches and being like, look, it's a church. This proves Russia is Christian, and we Americans should be closer to it. And this piece points out that Russia is like officially Orthodox and basically has no openness and tolerance towards other Christian sects, including having, the Catholic Church banned, essentially severely restricted in Russia, and has banned the Ukrainian Catholic Church in areas of the Ukraine that it's occupied. So this notion that, Russia is this sort of, Judeo-Christian example to the U.S. is completely false, particularly when, this piece explores the virulent anti-Semitism of the country as well. So the piece does a lot of things. I love how it goes after Candace Owens and her just what a duplicitous person she is. But also, as I said, it really smartly explores the larger MAGA conspiracy podcast world and all these folks who are in the pocket of the Kremlin and the ways that they have advanced a pro-Russian worldview through their particular media, their place in the conservative media sphere. So read the piece. Again, I don't make it a habit of reading the Free Press, but I think this is a smart one. And I think often the Free Press is best when it sort of investigates and attacks the conspiracy wing of the conservative movement, the MAGA movement, and this is certainly a good example of it.
Well, Neil, you're going to make me give $5 to Barry Weiss this month so that I can read this piece. Well, did the piece suggest, the first thing I thought about was Candace Owens doesn't do anything that she doesn't get paid for. And of course, Alex Jones is in a lot of trouble for money. We don't think Tucker Carlson is exactly in trouble for money, but his circumstances have changed. Do these people know that actually if they are getting Russian money to promote Russia, they have to register as foreign agents? Not that we have an FBI anymore that would do that, but
yeah, the piece actually does explore who it believes is being paid and who isn't, and sort of it's a mix of both. So that's a sort of another really fascinating aspect of the piece. But yeah, it's clear that some folks' bread is getting buttered, and in ways that, again, if we had a real FBI, would put them in violation of some American laws. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Neil. This week, I want our listeners to read Yudijit Bhattacharjee. I'm sure I mangled that. I'm sorry. In Plain Sight. It was in the New Yorker, May 18th edition, and it's about a Ghanaian girl named Jaina who was trafficked by her father, first to a very highly placed political family in Guinea, And she was trafficked when she was 8 years old. Then when she was 10 years old, they trafficked her to the United States to work as an unpaid servant for their daughter and her family. There are a number of really amazing things about this piece. One is that Jaina actually gets out of it, and she is living independently now, and she's gotten her GED and so on. She taught herself to read because, of course, they didn't send her to school. She taught herself to read. She would sort of take textbooks that the other children in the family were using, and she would take them to her room at night, and she would study them. But I also learned an incredibly important fact, which is I always think of human trafficking as being mostly about sex, and it is not. Over 70% of the people who are trafficked to the U.S. are brought for coerced labor. And we're talking sort of broadly things like nail salons, restaurants, farms, but it is not uncommon for well-placed families who have come from another country to the United States to have someone trafficked from their home country to be their unpaid servant. In fact, the mother in this family used the word slave to refer to Jaina. And part of what was interesting about this is it's just a suburban neighborhood. And they had this child living there who was doing all the work. And there were people in the neighborhood who kind of thought something was wrong. You know, she had ragged clothes. She was often wearing clothes that were handed down from the boy in the family. So she was wearing boys' clothes all the time. Her hair wasn't done well. Occasionally, when she misbehaved, they would simply throw her out and make her sleep in the park for days at a time. And she had a friend who, as it turns out, was a gay boy who was 14 years old, who made friends with her in the neighborhood. And he said, you know, when I grow up and get a job, I'm going to get you out of here. And as it turns out, he turned out to be one of the most important witnesses. There were two adult women that finally realized what was going on. She told them, and they believed her, and they rescued her, and they called the government, and so on and so forth. These adults who enslaved her have actually gone to jail. But this young man was the person who came in and said, yes, you know, since I was 14 years old, I've been meeting up with her in the park, and this is what she's been telling me, and this is what they did to her, and so on and so forth. But apparently also these cases are incredibly difficult to bring because you have to demonstrate, because they were saying, well, this is just a child from our family, and she was sent here to live with us. You have to demonstrate that the child was treated differently from the other children. And so there were things like the father drove her all the way to Dallas when she had an abscessed tooth. Just a range of things in which they were basically doing things like medical care completely under the table. So they were able to prove the case, but it's a really well-reported piece. It is very moving. And it's also really good on what enables human trafficking in the first place, which is that these are people who are hiding in plain sight. Yeah. So, Neil, that's it for this week.
Well, God bless that little gay boy for
helping
out. That's a good pride story for us.
It's an excellent pride story for us, and we are going to have a fantastic pride, and everywhere that we encounter bigotry and homophobia, we are going to go snap and make it go away.
So shame on you.
Shame on you, yes, and we are not going to use the F word. All right, Neil, I'll see you next week, friend.
See you next week.
And that's it for today's show. Thanks for hanging out with us. Share this podcast with a friend who loves history, politics, and smart conversation. You can follow Neil and me on Threads, Blue Sky, X, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Go to the Political Junkie Substack at clairepotter.substack.com for show notes, more episodes, to leave a comment or question, to subscribe for free, or to support our work for as little as $5 a month. You can also subscribe for free by searching for us on your favorite podcast platform. If you do, please leave a rating and a comment so that other listeners can find us. Our podcast is supported by the New School for Social Research and by paying subscribers. Political Junkie is written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Claire Potter. Today's theme is Lola, written and performed by the Kinks. Copyrighted music licensed from Lichty. That's all for now. See you next time.
La, la.